Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Rehash, a Web3 podcast. I'm your host, Diana Chen, and today we're speaking with Grace Guan, co-founder of Unlonely, a Web3 live streaming platform where we stream all of our podcasts for Rehash live before the edited version drops to your devices. Grace and her brother Brian co-founded Unlonely together and have been doing a phenomenal job of onboarding creators to their platform. Grace shares some stats on their user base and viewership in this episode, as well as what she thinks people working on consumer crypto apps need to be doing differently in order to get more users onto their platforms. We also talk a lot in this episode about Web 2 versus Web 3 media, and Grace has some really good insights as somebody who used to work at YouTube before she pivoted to crypto. She shares some information about the YouTube algorithms and inner workings that I had no idea about and found to be really interesting, and she also shares her thoughts on how we can improve the way in which traditional media platforms operate and exploit creators by getting rid of ads and algorithms in this new iteration of media that we're building in Web 3. If you're a creator or anyone working adjacent to Web3 media, you won't want to miss this episode with Grace. Also, if you want to make sure you don't miss a live stream in the future and the opportunity to get your questions answered live, make sure you hop into our Telegram group at t.me/rehashweb3 and follow us on socials at rehashweb3, where we'll be announcing all of our live streams and everything that's going on in our community. You can also subscribe to Rehash Podcast Club on Hypersub to get every episode minted and airdropped straight to your wallet and to access our completely raw and unedited live recordings before the episode drops to the public. You can find the link to that on our website at rehashweb3.xyz or hop into our Telegram group and we'll drop the link to you there. Grace was nominated by Winny and voted onto the podcast by Winny, Triumph, Maz, Andy Boyan, Birb, David Phelps, Lucas, Ernest Kou, and myself, Diana Chen. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Grace. We have Unlonely Mommy with us, Grace Guan. So happy to have you here. And it's crazy to me that this is actually our first time speaking.
I was
the two of us,
thinking that
outside
too.
of DMs or chats.
Yeah.
Which is wild because I see you in the Unlonely chats all the time and we're always like going back and forth. And so I feel like I've spoken to you and
yes.
I've seen you on like some of the streams that Brian does, which we need to get you on more streams because great, like no shit.
He dominates
Brian,
too much of the
Brian
airspace.
just, like,
I know.
Dominates. Yeah. You have to, we gotta like do something to kick him off and get you on more.
He has the personality that I think is like truly made for streaming. I like streaming, but the vibe of my streams is just very different. It's much more.
That's fine though.
Cozy friends hanging out.
And I think that's fine. I mean, Brian is definitely good at streaming. Like he has there's like not an ounce of like self-consciousness, I think, that he feels in his body, which is great if you're going to be streaming. But we don't need that all the time, right? Like sometimes people just want to chill and not be so unhinged.
Not always live in fear of like what the next thing coming out of his mouth is going to be.
Exactly. Yeah. I imagine that's how you live your life all the time.
Yeah, it is actually. I think I've been well conditioned for that at this point. I have no expectation.
Okay, well, I want to dive in and I want to start with just the Unlonely origin story, which I know you've told a little bit, but just like a real short, quick recap of how did you guys get the idea for Unlonely in the first place?
It's a fun story. I always love telling it. I think there are two angles. So I think for Brian, he realized pretty quickly after working at a couple startups that he was unmanageable and basically needed to work for himself. So I think he was very much like, I am going to be a founder. That's the only path for me. I, on the other hand, am very trad, elder daughter of immigrants, must chase after all of the public affirmations and validation kind of gal. So I went through my whole life being like, okay, I went to the good school. I'm going to work in big tech now. Like, this is great. This is going to be my job for life. I went and did an MBA, and actually doing my MBA was my version of being like, I'm going to do something risky. Like, I'm going to move away from this tech job and do something risky, which I think is hilarious. It's like very indicative of the place of risk averseness of which I was at in like 2020, basically. So doing this MBA, I felt like I had bought myself like 2 years of exploratory experimental time. And that was the only way that I was able to justify getting into crypto. Because I was like, you know what? I'm doing this MBA. I'm fully exploring all of my options. I should try this out. Like this has been something kind of that's been in the back of my head for a while, especially working with like content creators at YouTube, like people that had kind of poured their whole lives into building audiences on these platforms. I found the creator economy intersection with Web3 kind of in the early 2001 period to be really interesting. So I thought that I would just like do a couple internships and then see where it went. But it was around the same time that Brian was then exploring ideas that he wanted to build. So I came on as more of an advisor. I was like, hey, Brian, I'm so here to like be here for you to bounce your ideas off. And I honestly didn't think that we would end up, I don't know, like doing something that we were both mutually super interested in. I thought that he was going to go in a totally separate direction. Like he had studied math and chemical engineering in undergrad. I had studied like pure humanities, philosophy, politics, and economics. And I had gone in that like kind of content media world. But like, as you said, he's kind of a natural live streamer kind of personality. Yeah. And he had attempted, I think like in early COVID days to become a Twitch streamer. And I remember him like texting our family chat being like, guys, I'm live, like cooking with tofu or something like that. And it was like us. It was like 3 people watching the Twitch stream, which like now it's like, oh, okay, at least like 30 or 40 people will show up to his Unlonely streams. Like that's actually like it's a good 10x from there. We ended up landing on this space where we were both really interested in building a consumer app. I think that was the other thing. It was like deep in the crypto bear market and everyone was talking like DeFi infra protocol level stuff. And even though it felt like, I remember being like, this is a really intimidating thing to be building in. Like, how do you start building a consumer app when like there are barely any consumers and B, like nothing really exists like this before. And so it's been really kind of like interesting to see that narrative shift over the last few years. Of course, then we've had like, now it's everyone's like, oh my gosh, we have all this infrastructure, but like, where are the apps to use? Like, where are the fun things to be actually doing with our cryptocurrencies? So
I know, see, I know that was the narrative at ECC that I heard over and over. Everybody was like, where are the apps? Where are the apps? And like, we had Jimmy Chain on Mini Hash last week. And he was also saying like, everybody was like, where are the apps? Where are the apps? I personally feel like the apps are there. Like
I think so too.
Maybe it's just me. Like I see the apps. The apps are there. For me, it's like, where are the users?
Yes.
Like what is your daily active user count? What is your monthly active user count? Like is it like over 3 digits? You know, like I feel like that's where
that's the bar
right now. It kind of is, honestly, it kind of is.
I agree. And I have found that even with, I mean, I guess for us, it's interesting. Like we're a 2-sided platform. So that was even more difficult, right? It's like you have to find the streamers to create content for people to engage them, but then you also need to help them find viewers and audience members so that it's like a good experience for them and like a valuable and worthwhile experience for them. And I think what's interesting is like at this point, it feels like there's more content being produced than there are like people to actually engage with the content. I think that's like, I mean, it's changing. Like we're working on discoverability. We're working on, and we can get into this, like kind of a new feature launch, a new sort of like product cycle that we're in, which is like very focused on helping content go viral to then like sort of feed into that, like, okay, discoverability. Now you've like seen content from this channel, like a highlight clip from this channel that you've never heard of, but you're interested. And maybe there's also some like social financial incentive in there for you too, because of course it's crypto. I think it's like, maybe people are, there's like too many devs that want to build fun apps. And I have this conversation with Brian a lot. Like they're not thinking about go to market and they're not thinking about like, how do I actually bring this message to people and frame it in a way that makes it interesting and useful for them, and then also make the experience really seamless when there are still a lot of barriers, I think, in that entire flow.
I was going to save this part for later, but Brian is in the chat popping off. He wants me to ask you what your least favorite thing about working with him is. So let's talk about that. I mean, let's just dive right on. He's in the chat now, so why not roast him now while he's around? What's your experience been working with your brother? And to his question, what's your least favorite thing about working with him?
Where do I start? No, I'm just kidding. I would say that, like, very objectively speaking, working with Brian has been an overwhelmingly positive experience, much better than I was expecting. Like, I had never anticipated us working together. And I think as the elder sibling as well, I had always seen him as this kind of like, almost like a child that I had to parent throughout my life. Like, I feel like you could probably relate to this. Like, it's just like, my
Yes.
parents felt like they couldn't really communicate with them, but like I was their means of like just conveying that information across. Therefore, I became the
100%.
middleman.
Yeah.
So like the sort of second parent.
Yep. Too real. That is too real. What's your age gap, by the way?
We are like 4 years apart.
My sister and I are like almost 8 years apart. So I really very much felt like her second mom growing up.
That's very fair. I think if we were 8 years apart, I would find this more difficult. We're like kind of just at the cusp where I'm like, there's enough that he brings to the table that I find really valuable, that I find like, I'm like, oh, okay, I respect you. I respect all these things that you're able to bring. And that was all like, I think part of us working together. Like, I think working together has made me realize that he is in fact his own individual, an adult, responsible human who, even if he is being like chaotic and unhinged and a little bit crazy on the internet in a way that I don't feel comfortable with personally, it is very authentically him. And that is something that has been like constant from him as a child. Like, he's always been very authentically himself, for better or for worse, like even if it meant like alienating a lot of people in a way that wasn't very diplomatic, perhaps in like middle school or high school. I think it's gotten him to this place now where he's like, okay, I could be myself without like necessarily pissing off a bunch of people that I like or that I care about or something like that.
Yeah. I think you guys strike a really good balance because he is so, I mean, you can say unhinged, or on a more positive note, he is so authentically himself.
Yes.
And you're definitely a lot more like put together. But it's like, I think, having been a creator in this space and other spaces prior to crypto too in the past, it's like, you as a creator, like if you want to have a big audience, you are going to alienate some people, and you're going to have to be okay with that.
Be okay with it.
Not everyone is going to like you.
Yes.
And you're never going to be able to make everybody like you. Like even somebody like you who is like so nice and kind and well put together, like I'm sure if you got out there streaming more, somebody would find something.
We're the haters.
Yeah. I'm sure somebody would find something negative to say about you. I mean, there's so many keyboard warriors out there who just like have miserable lives and want to shit on people for no reason. So, I mean, honestly, to Brian's credit, he is doing, I think, what he needs to be doing, which is being himself. And that's going to attract the people that are attracted to that kind of personality and alienate the rest. But, that's okay. Like, you're not going to have everybody on your platform anyway. Or maybe you will one day. Like, maybe Unlonely will become the next YouTube.
We just become so good that even if they do, even if they do hate us, they're still going to be forced to use us because it is the de facto.
Exactly.
That's the goal.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so going back to Brian's question then, what is your least favorite thing about working with him?
Okay, what's my least favorite thing about working with Brian? I think I'm like trying to be thoughtful about this. I think it is that I am naturally very type A. I like to have a plan. I like to think through the plan. I like to execute on the plan if I feel like if I feel like we've been thoughtful and we've come to a conclusion and we've sort of like set some steps forward on how we want to attack that. Brian is very intuition led. And I think that is actually really, again, nice in like an early stage startup environment where maybe like we've talked about this, getting like stuck in the idea maze or sort of just being like, oh, like scope creep. Like we want to do this one thing, but now it's like, oh, we want to do all these things all at once to make it like the most perfect product feature launch or something like that. And he definitely has a very high sense of like urgency, maybe ADHD, and just like is like, we need to get this out. We need to get this out. Like get this out or we die. Get this out or we die. And that kind of mentality, I think on the one hand, it can be really beneficial in this environment when it really is like we could die, it's like all of these early stage social apps, it does feel very existential in some ways, but it is like probably stressful to my mentality when I'm like, we literally had a conversation about this and we had agreed on X, Y, and Z points. And now we're like just throwing all of that away, moving in another direction because like the tide has changed or the feelings have changed. The vibes are no longer there. That is probably something that stresses me out. But again, to your point, like I think we just are like the yin and the yang on that front. And the way that I always pitch it is that I think Brian is like a 0 to 1 founder and I'm like a 1 to scaling founder. And so I try to be sort of like judicious about when it makes sense for us to be leaning into sort of Brian's strengths and when we should actually be sort of like what I think like following through on things that we think are important to us and like need to stay part of our roadmap. Yeah,
no, I hear you 100%. I can definitely relate to a lot of that. I would say that I am probably more like Brian by nature, but I think just, having had jobs and been forced to slow down a little bit and be more thoughtful about things, I think I understand the other side as well. And I try be like that, but I think by nature, like if I don't control myself and like check myself, I think I definitely have the tendency to be a little bit more like how Brian is naturally. But how do you guys like solve those conflicts? Or like if Brian is like, we have to do this right now, like, or else we're gonna die, and you're like, no, but we just talked about this, and like this is not part of our roadmap, and you know we should do X, Y, and Z. Like who wins usually?
It depends.
Brian says he wins.
Obviously, that is what Brian thinks. What Brian doesn't know is that sometimes I let him win, and he doesn't know that, that I'm playing chess. He's playing checkers, and I'm playing chess. I think I do defer to him on product decisions, because at the end of the day, like, he is the technical co-founder. He built our MVP and manages our dev. So if it is something that is like highly like, okay, this is like a product that we're thinking about, then I'll defer to him on that. I think I take ownership of pretty much everything else. So if it is like content, ops, marketing, brand, any of those sorts of things. And yeah, like actually we have some examples of this where like Love on Leverage, for example, very obviously, I think my baby, like who else would come up with a crypto reality TV dating show and then like become the behind the scenes matchmaker? This was like a dream job for me. And those have been like my successful case studies. And then we did try to do what was called Riz Olympics, which Brian will probably get mad at me for calling out for this. But Brian was like, oh my God, this is going to be an amazing show. Think about this. We're going to put a bunch of people on Omegle and then let people bet on it, you know? And I remember just being like, I remember thinking and being like, I don't know, that feels pretty risky. Like, there's a lot of dicks on Omegle, you know? There's a lot of, like, stuff that we cannot control for, like, the way that Omegle is used. I don't feel like that is necessarily going to lead to, like, a great content viewing experience. And we sort of like, but he was like, no, this is gonna be great. Like, we got to do this. This is the next big idea. Like, we can't stay stuck to just like the dating matchmaking. Like, we're gonna expand. And I sort of, I like knew deep in my gut that it didn't feel like it was gonna work, but I was like, I don't want to be that person that always says no to him. So like, let's run with it. Let's go. Let's find the people. Let's try to make it happen. And we were like halfway into one episode and he was like, we can't do this anymore. Like, this is not gonna work.
Yeah. I actually remember I had met Brian like through Twitter shortly before the Riz Olympics idea came about, and I think he had pitched me on it. Like, he was like, do you want to be part of our next show? Yeah. And I was like, what is it? Because like up to that point, all I had seen was Love on Leverage, and like I'm married, so obviously like I wouldn't partake in that. Yeah. And so I was just like, well, what is it? And he's like, well, I can't tell you. I was kind of hoping you just say yes and roll with it. And I was like, no. I'm sorry, but that's not me. You gotta look elsewhere. I am not signing up for that. And then I saw Riz Olympics come out, and I was like, oh, thank God I didn't sign up for that. Like, what a disaster.
This is like Brian's pitch is like, hey, will you sign this blank check?
Yeah.
That's all.
Well, the thing is, like, I think that works a lot in crypto. Yeah. Like, I can see that working with a lot of people. So it's not necessarily a bad strategy. I was just like, that's not my brand. I can't do that. Yeah, it's not for me, but I love that for you.
Absolutely.
Okay, so going back then to Unlonely and Web 2 versus Web 3 media, because you came from traditional media, you used to work at YouTube, right?
Yep.
So how do you think your background in traditional media at YouTube influenced some of the ways that you approached building Unlonely?
I think it's actually uncanny the amount of overlap I have found in some of my day-to-day work as far as like speaking to streamers, talking to creators, understanding like their pain points. It really feels like some of that has like almost copy paste from like daily interactions that I was having with YouTubers, and then just kind of changing the language over from like YouTube Web 2 platform terminology to crypto terminology. Like, I remember there was a period of time, especially in kind of our early stages when we were doing a lot of like onboarding of new streamers, and it was sort of like I had almost like a script that I was going through to like get people to understand what we were doing and help them understand the tools that were available to them, and also like help them brainstorm and kind of get their footing on the platform. I was like, wow, this is like actually using exactly what I used to do, but for this sort of new media, new economy, and just a totally new set of tools. I think like on a more strategic, like maybe like on a higher level, I'm just thinking like, I think it really helped me become really empathetic to creators. And this is like an unknown take anymore. Like, I think people have a lot more transparency into like what being a creator is actually like, how much work it is, like how it can be stressful. But I remember at the time when I was working at YouTube in like kind of the 2017, 2018 times, they had a very bad rep of like, oh my God, influencers are the worst. They just get sent free stuff all the time, and like they don't do any work. They're so stressed out about having to like, oh my God, film my day in the life, or like what I eat in a day or something like that. And I think some of this has to do with misogyny as well, which we can get into. There was a lot of this like, like sports is such an interesting hobby to have, and like being like following all of your favorite sports teams and all of their stats is like so highbrow and intellectual of you. But if you like to watch like YouTube content, or like, I don't know, like vloggers or something like that, then, or like nowadays TikTokers, it's like, like that's so lowbrow, you're like just brain rot. You're not doing anything with your brain. You're so mentally lazy or something like that. And I find that to be I find that to be a very interesting take that people have on like kind of internet media consumption in general. But having worked with these people, it's like very stressful being a creator. Like I think especially on the Web2 media platforms, where kind of every day I would have somebody being like, tell me about the algorithm. Like, I need to understand the algorithm. Why does the algorithm hate me right now? Am I getting shadow banned? What am I doing wrong? Has something changed? Because I used to do X, Y, and Z, and I'm still doing X, Y, and Z, but like, I'm just not getting the same views, the same engagement. I'm not getting shown to these people anymore. And that level of stress, and knowing that they could have spent a decade building their audience on YouTube or on some platform, and that audience could either be like taken away at any given moment, they could just like no longer be able to reach the audience, all of that, and the kind of like constant need to feed the algorithm was a very intense way to live life, I felt like. And I think it's been really interesting to see, like, there were a lot of big YouTubers that I remember I followed who had millions of followers and then took like multi-year breaks where they just were like, they like disappeared from YouTube for many, many years. And then in the last few months have come back and are like, I feel ready to approach this relationship again. Like, I feel ready to kind of like dip my toe back into here. And it's just quite interesting to see, because I definitely have formed those like parasocial relationships to them. And I'm like, oh my God, they're back. This is so exciting. Like, I want to be a part of their life again. And it's all just crazy internet dynamics.
Yeah. So I was actually travel blogging from 2017 until 2020 and doing the whole like Instagram influencing thing, because that was before TikTok really came about. Instagram was a big platform, and I like remember that constantly being like, what's the algorithm now? Like, what are the algorithm updates? You have to stay up so on top of all of that, or else like suddenly you'll post something and it gets no engagement and you're like, what happened here? But maybe it's because you worked at YouTube, maybe you can shed some light into how YouTube manages, or used to manage when you work there, its algorithm. Like who decides what the algorithm is? Because it's like, on the one hand, like for me personally, like having experienced all that, I'm kind of like it's almost like PTSD inducing to like think about the algorithm. But at the same time, like I understand why there needs to be an algorithm and why it maybe needs to change, so that people can't just figure out how to game it and then inundate the platform with like really bad content.
Spammy
like, we do
stuff.
want to reward spammy stuff. Like we do want to reward like actually good content on these platforms. So how did you get any insight into like who at YouTube is like setting the algorithm, and like how do they decide what the algorithm is going to be, and like when they change it and when they update it and all these things?
I don't think I have a very, very in-depth answer to that. I know we had like a search and discovery team, and that was effectively the algorithm team. And the sort of like, we had a very PR answer that we had to give to creators, which is like, the algorithm follows the audience. That was kind of like, that was meant to be like all that we were, and it's kind of like full stop, end stop. And it's like, you're the problem, like figure out who your audience is, reach the audience. Like if your content is
it's
good.
It's not us, it's you.
Exactly. It was very like, like good content will always rise to the top. Like that was sort of the implication, I feel like.
Right.
I think in reality, there were like so many different algorithms, right? Like it's not like one single algorithm that is controlling everyone's viewing experience. Even between like just different types of teams, there was search and discovery, which was very specifically focused on like algorithms, like surfacing the right content for the right people. There was also like a trust and safety algorithm, which was like making sure that content policies weren't being violated, or like if you had edgy content that was like more mature, that would go to a different subset of people. If you were kind of like, if you were kids content, then that would be treated a very different way and had a higher level of sensitivity. And all of these things were like really nuanced and constantly changing. Because I remember the trust and safety team like effectively didn't exist when I first started at YouTube, and then became a huge thing because there was so much abuse on the platform. There was like this thing called Elsa Gate, where there were basically adults cosplaying as like Elsa and various other Disney characters, and then committing like really, really vile acts of like gory violence and sexual behavior in these costumes, but then like titling it like, Elsa goes to Disneyland, like, like sort of like super, super innocent, child-friendly stuff. And it was a disaster. Like a lot of this content got fed to kids on their iPads who were on like the YouTube Kids specific app. And it kind of led to a huge overhaul in how content was treated across the platform and how it was categorized. And it was like a huge, like a big thing. And it's really hard to kind of understand what some of those abusive behaviors could be, I think, when you're first designing a platform that is initially like, oh my God, how do we just like maximize reach, maximize users, like give people the most satisfactory experience possible. There's a lot of stuff at play and it is constantly evolving. That being said, I do also think it's bullshit when the team would be like, yeah, like there's nothing you can do to game the algorithm. Like there absolutely is. Like, for example, you can tell like when TikTok came on the scene and YouTube was like, oh my gosh, we need to create a competitor to TikTok. Here's YouTube Shorts. Okay, we're just gonna like piggyback off of what everyone else is doing, TikTok Reels Shorts. There definitely was like if you posted a lot of shorts, you would get a boost in like your broader content. And I think if you had like a person like me at YouTube that you could talk to about this, we would tell you that. But otherwise you were just kind of on your own, left to figure that out for yourself or like make up conspiracy theories.
Yeah. How did you guys, working at YouTube, how did you guys feel about services like TubeBuddy, for example, like the extension that will help you with your SEO when you're posting your YouTube videos and things like that? Do you think those services are actually useful and do they keep up with the algorithms, or do you think that's more just like a scam to get people to pay for something that they think is being useful?
I think it gave people a sense of control, maybe. And if that like helped them with like their strategy or like managing their anxiety around not understanding the algorithm, then that's great. Like, I think like if it works for you, it works for you. We never recommended any of those things. I think we tried to build a lot of those analytics into like the back end so that people could actually like see all that data firsthand. But that was the other thing, is that like these creators, like unless they have a huge like management team and like a biz dev team or something, a branding team, analytics team, like they didn't really know what to do with these dashboards of like all this data that YouTube could show them. All they would see is like this one, like, there would be like an up arrow or a down arrow. And if it was like a red down arrow, they'd be just freaking out. And if it was an up arrow, then things were good. So a lot of times, like, I think the other valuable thing that we would do was these like business plans where we would do like a deep dive into like the last 90 days of your analytics and like actually try to give you some takeaways on like, oh, like click-through rate was way higher on these thumbnails and this type of content over this. And like there's kind of a flywheel of content. We call it like hero, hub, and help, where it's like you have your hero content that attracts new audience. You have your hub content that kind of like maintains and keeps your like kind of keeps retention of your existing audience. And then you have help, which is dedicated to like specifically answering certain questions that are arising in your audience or your community. So I think stuff like that was like frameworks that creators had never heard of. And were like, whoa, like I've just never had a way to think about the way that I treat this. And that like would help them in terms of like being able to have a broader defined strategy.
Yeah, there's also like so many little like things that you can do even when you're uploading your video. Like there's tags, there's like end screens and like other things you can add. Are all of those actually, how important are all of those things, or are they just there? Because the way I, back when I was like doing this more full time, like I was keeping track of the algorithm more and like had like news alerts set or whatever. But now I'm kind of just like, let me just fill out all the fields that they're asking me to fill out. Like I'm sure it's here for a reason. Like it can't hurt, right? To like add in tags or whatever. So let me just do it. But I'm like, how much time am I actually wasting doing all of this?
I think even by the time I was there many years ago, hashtags were like completely useless. Like didn't really do anything. I think to your point, like can't hurt, but most of those are not needle movers. Like I think you're better off, I guess, like investing your time into like, so like one thing that I found out about, or sort of kind of some lore from YouTube, was that Mr. Beast actually would hire stand-up comedians and like put them in like a war room to come up with like his next big video idea, or like, a brainstorm session of like the next 10 videos that Mr. Beast is going to have. And so he basically like, hired these people who were like, I don't know, professional riffers or like professional creative individuals to just like come up with bits that they thought were going to be really sticky. And then of course he had like the money and the resources to put like tons and tons of attention behind it, which like not everyone has that machine. But I think he was able to kind of like take that algorithm and make it his bitch. Like I don't know a better way to put it. Like he really knew it was kind of gaming it, but like in a smart way. It wasn't just like, oh, I'm gonna like clickbait people and then
Right.
that's it. Like, it's just a waste of time and it's like super spammy. I think he put a lot of time and effort into understanding what would work for him on that platform, and then it paid dividends, basically.
Yeah, he figured out a way how to actually make engaging content. It's like that whole, you gotta engage your audience in the first like few seconds of your video or whatever hook. Like, he really figured out how to do that. Speaking of Mr. Beast, who are some of your other favorite YouTubers? I know you have a thing for British YouTubers. I need to know more about this. It sounds like you moved to London to maybe stalk your British YouTuber creators that you really like.
That's not an unfair assumption. I feel like it's more like I moved to London to live the aspirational lifestyle that these British YouTubers portray that I bought into. I think that is probably a better, that's probably a more true version of what happened.
What is the lifestyle that they sold? Like, were they just vloggers filming like their day to day? Like, what, or were they doing something cool?
No, they're mostly daily vloggers. It's actually like and this is a thing that happened with the algorithm as well, which is like it went from like short form content to long form content, where like before in the early days, anything over like 5 to 7 minutes would just like no one would watch that on YouTube. And now it's like, I will only watch a vlog if it's like more than 30 minutes long. And it's usually part of my nighttime routine. It's like my unwinding ASMR, like shut my brain off. YouTube is probably still like the number one content that number one platform that I consume content on, like over like a Netflix or an HBO or Disney Plus or like whatever else, like what other like where people watch TV shows, I watch British tradwife countryside YouTubers. Which is funny, because I think I was really early to this, like, tradwife influencer game. Because Nara Smith is way behind. I could send you some links after, but they are, like, cosplaying. Like, they are in the Cotswolds, in the countryside. They are doing their gardening. They have chickens in there, but they're, like, all super wealthy, and are always living this, like, they're always in, like, a very glamorous dress. They're in their Hermes sandals when they're doing their gardening. You know what I mean? Like, it's like a very...
So is that your aspirational dream? Is that your aspirational dream life? Like wearing the designer sandals in your garden in the countryside with all these nice things, but also your chickens and your cows?
I could care less about the Hermes sandals, but there is something about having like a very aesthetically curated and beautiful life that's also very like organic, I think, and very like calming and nature oriented, and like like you grow all your own food, like everything is so fresh. Like something about that I think is like a solve to my suburban American upbringing.
So you moved to London, which has no farms or countryside.
No, I'm still early. I'm still in an early stage of reaching my manifested life.
Okay. Have you watched the show Farmer Wants a Wife?
No. Do I need to watch it?
Okay, and you like trashy reality dating shows?
Yes.
What?
Yes.
If you like trashy reality dating shows, and this is what you just described is the aspirational life you have to watch it. It's an Australian show. They have spin-offs now. They have like a US version, but the Australian version is the best one. That's the original one, I think. Okay. You have to watch it.
Where can I watch it? What platform is it on?
I believe it's Hulu. I think. Okay. I can double check and let you know later, but I believe it's Hulu.
I will look into it. I'll look into it. Wow, that sounds amazing.
I'm really shocked that you haven't seen that, considering
is it
like
a big
these
show?
Various niches.
I've literally never heard of it. It's kind of niche.
I don't know. I don't. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Like, the farm thing also intrigues me just because, like, it's so unrelatable to me of, like, why you would want to date a farmer that, like, I think I watch it to, like, understand a new perspective of, like, what is attractive to people about farmers.
I don't know if I want to date. I don't know if I want to date a farmer. I want to be the farmer. You know what I mean? I don't know if the kind of man that I'm looking for is a farmer.
There was one season of Farmer Wants a Wife where there was a girl. Like, usually it's like the farmer is a man. And then all these girls come and date him. But there was one season where there was a girl farmer. And all these guys came to date her.
Okay. So that could be, all right. I'm gonna find that episode. I'm more interested in the farmer bachelorette. Yeah.
I'll find it and send it to you, but that could totally be you. Achieve your aspirational dreams, become a farmer, go on Farmer Wants a Wife, and find your husband from that show.
And stream it on Unlonely.
Obviously. Yeah, obviously stream all of it on Unlonely.
Okay,
Okay,
done.
love that tangent. I don't even know where we were at with this, talking about YouTube and trad media. What do you think are
Yeah.
some things that we should that that we should be like best practices from traditional media that we should be bringing into Web3 media, into Unlonely? And what are some things that like we just need to leave behind, like that sucked?
I think like what's top of mind for me right now with Unlonely, and we've touched on this already, but like discoverability is still something that we need to work on. And I think trad media has obviously done a really great job of this, where they can kind of just like hook onto one thing that you care about and then like find an entire rabbit hole in a way that you maybe, yeah, never knew existed to that degree. I think especially on TikTok. I think the flip side of that though is that the algorithmic and then also like laid on top of the ads business model is something that I would really love to leave behind. Like that is like ultimately one of the big reasons why I got into crypto and have stayed in crypto, is because I think what I saw at YouTube was that there were like four stakeholders. It was sort of YouTube, advertisers, creators, users. And time again, it was advertisers and YouTube that were really like by and far away the top priority, and creators and users, like they just kind of get what they get. Like the sort of like negative effects on them is not really considered, or maybe it's considered but it's not really cared about. And I would love for that to change in Web3. I would love for that to like not be a part of the kind of negative rabbit hole that we find people in, because it's like, yeah, it's like at the end of the day, the reason why clickbait works is because you just need to get like ad eyeballs, and without that incentive there, then you can just create better content that you want to create without having to gear it towards like what's going to get me the most number of eyeballs in the shortest amount of time, so that like CPM conversion is like super high.
What's the solution that you see for Web3? Like, because, you know, in traditional media, ads, they address the issue of monetization. So how do Web3 platforms like Unlonely monetize? And then with the algorithm, like we were just talking about, it's partly, you know, in big part, a safety concern too. And then in other part, it's like so people can't game it and make it super spammy. How do we address that issue?
I think on ads, like we have established a new type of culture and behavior where we don't expect our content to all be subsidized by ads. And so whether you're paying for that through a subscription, like I know you have a hyper sub, or whether you're paying to like influence the experience and be a part of the experience, like what we've done with the kind of like vibes and on-chain features with our previous Love on Leverage seasons, I think all of those things are like really just being developed and just being experimented with. But I think it really is like at the base level, like people should want to pay and be willing to pay for the content that they want to engage with, and that should be a great way to compensate the kind of the creator. Like that should be, I think, the end sort of relationship that you have with each other, because otherwise you really just end up in like a no one has any control. There's too many factors at play.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And then what about on the algorithm side? Like, what do we do to replace the algorithm to still keep people safe, to still keep all the spam off of the platform? Like, what's the solution to that?
I definitely don't have the answer to that. We have talked about, like Brian and I in the early days talked about like, oh, what are we going to do when we have maybe like unsafe content on the platform or something like that? Like, how are we going to make decisions around whether like where we draw the line of being safe or not? And I think like being in crypto, we were sort of like, well, why don't we like give that decision to the people using the platform? And so maybe it is sort of like some version of a DAO or some version of like some governance structure where ultimately it's like the users and the people that are contributing value to the platform have ownership over that, instead of it just being this sort of like almighty centralized black box that will make a decision and no one will even know about it. So I think like just at least providing transparency and then giving people the opportunity to participate in that decision-making process. I don't know what that will look like in practice yet, because obviously like there are a lot of criticisms of how DAO structures are super bureaucratic and not very efficient, maybe not very effective. But I'm like hopeful and optimistic that we will find ways to make all of those things better.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian's saying cross that bridge when we get there. 100%. I know we were talking about this a little bit earlier with, you know, us having enough apps in the space. It's the users that we don't have. And I know you're mostly in charge with Unlonely of onboarding new people to the platform and growth and things like that. So what has your experience with that been so far? And in general, like what are your thoughts on how can we get more users onto these Web3 apps? Because that seems to be the biggest struggle that everybody's facing.
I think we need to make everything way easier to use and then way more fun to use. And like honestly, my experience has been great so far, but I think that that's because I'm in this bubble where people people who are willing to engage with crypto consumer apps have a very high tolerance for shitty experiences.
Yeah.
And I think we need to like not take that totally for granted. Like I there's totally a trade-off of like when you're a small scrappy team, you're still trying to figure out what exactly your product is going to bring in the long term, like to users, to society at large. It's not worth like fixating on perfecting one small part of that experience before you really get to that point where you're ready to scale. But I think like a lot is sacrificed on that end, and people are, I don't know, I just feel like people are making apps just for like the fun of it rather than really fulfilling a demand. And I think someone had maybe asked this on Twitter about like questions to ask on the podcast, which was like, what was the origin story of the name Unlonely? And that's like part of something that we really cared about, which is like, we want to create an experience on the internet that instead of like pushing people into tiny silos where they're just like doom scrolling by themselves and then like, you know, wake up like 3 hours later and are like, what the fuck did I just spend the last 3 hours doing? We wanted to build like an experience that is inherently really communal. And when you have to be live and like synchronous with everybody in one place at one time, then you are able to build that. And I feel like that's also contributing to like the experience that I've had with like, oh, I already know Diana. Like I literally know like what her voice sounds like. I know how she responds to my chats. I know kind of like what her humor is like. And I know that we can banter and troll Brian. And like, these are all things that we've bonded over in this sort of environment. So creating less lonely spaces on the internet that are also more fun inherently, like we've really, I think, like tried to gear our brand toward giving people a space to have fun is like something that I still really care about.
Yeah, absolutely. I've noticed that too. I think the people in the space right now do have a really high tolerance for things not working well, but I think that's also, which is a good thing for, you know, somebody like you who's trying to onboard a lot of people to your app.
We really appreciate
at the same time,
it.
But I think that's also what's keeping the numbers small. Like, I don't know if you know off the top of your head, like what Unlonely daily active users or monthly active users or any other stats like that, or if you're open to share, but I'd be curious if you have those just to have a ballpark idea of like how many people are actually using Unlonely.
I took a look because I knew that you might ask. We are seeing on average like 100 channels streaming per week, which is pretty exciting. I think like we've been seeing that number definitely tick up and like stay consistent over time.
Yeah.
Each channel attracting like 50 to 100 viewers over the course of the week. That's obviously depending on their like streaming schedule and how big of an audience they might already have on another platform. And then in total, kind of across all of that, about 500 hours watched per week, which is like at YouTube, watch time was like the primary metric that people were looking for because that was like a views times retention type of metric. Those aren't any like numbers to write home about on like a traditional social, like traditional consumer platform. But like we said, like in the consumer world, it's hard to even see numbers beyond this, right? And like, I think even at Brussels, at ECC, someone, I won't dox anyone, but someone told me about like a conversation that they were having with somebody who was building like a large social consumer protocol. And they were like, what do you think are, you know, what's like the market size of like this whole user base? And they were like 50,000 users. And we were like, it was kind of one of those moments where we're like, do you really believe that? Because like, if we really believe that, how is not the biggest thing that we should be solving for right now? Like, how is not everyone focusing on that single digit right now?
Speaking of that and like onboarding, everyone agrees like if we're going to hit those numbers, we have to onboard normies onto these apps and not just people that are in crypto already. So if you had to onboard like a traditional, your favorite British YouTuber who doesn't know anything about crypto, we're able to get on a phone call with them or meet them in a coffee shop. Like what would be your like 30-second or 1-minute pitch to your favorite British YouTuber who doesn't know anything about crypto about why they should start streaming on Unlonely?
That's such a great question. And it's not one that we've spent a lot of time thinking about because we've made a conscious decision to target crypto native users before getting to a point where we kind of expand beyond that. I still think it's an interesting thought experiment. The reason why we've done that is because having worked with traditional creators, I know how difficult it is to get them to switch. And like, especially if they have already like had a lot of sunk costs in building an audience on another platform, it just gets like harder and harder the more traction they have on that other place. I think it almost like they have to kind of hit a point where they experience either like being deplatformed or sort of have like a kind of like personal negative experience with like this platform just obviously doesn't care about me at all. It doesn't matter how many users and how many like millions of ad dollars I've brought to them. They will still drop me because like I'm just one like I don't know, I'm one drop in the bucket for them. And they have all these other advertisers that they need to care about, that if it's like sacrificing me versus them, it will always be me. I think like A, maybe having that like personal experience, or B, like just that narrative becoming more and more dominant, and also C, crypto becoming less and less negative in terms of its reputation in the media. Like we had a conversation with Lucy Guo, who's building passes. And that was interesting because she's like also funded by Multicoin. She started off as like a crypto social consumer kind of like subscription app as well, and they've completely pivoted away from crypto. They were basically, she was sort of like, yeah, if you want to talk about onboarding any traditional creator in the world, as soon as you mention crypto, they're like immediately turned off. And I, you know, maybe that information is a little bit stale. I think we had that conversation like close to a year ago, and things are changing, but I don't know that any like one conversation will do that. I think it's going to have to be like relationship building and multiple conversations over time. And it's trust. At the end of the day, it's like totally all about trust. And I think if I were able to like continue to build trust with them over time, then that would work. But it's going to take some time. And right now, it just makes more sense for us to focus on people who are already at least bought into like the ethos or the philosophical side of crypto. And we don't need to do kind of like all that convincing up front.
I think to your point, it definitely helps if you're talking to somebody who's been burned by traditional media. Like the way that I learned about crypto initially was I learned about it was like exactly in this context of like how decentralization can change things for creators. And at that time, that was when I was like travel blogging, Instagram influencing. I had seen so many people have their Instagram accounts completely deleted, like people who ran shops on their small shops or had built up a following and were doing brand sponsorships or whatever. And they were making their entire livelihood, like all the income they were making was coming from that. And all of a sudden, like overnight, they lose access to their Instagram account, which equals like losing access to their ability to make money and to like live, which is insane. And if you go to Instagram and you're like, hey, why did my account get closed down? They're not gonna bother to talk to you about it. Like no one's gonna, no one has time to like help you with your issue. They're just like, oh, sorry, like it is what it is. Like you'd have to deal with it. So that was like the thing that I was like, oh wow, like I can actually own my audience. Like if my Instagram got shut down, like there would be a way in which, like in the Web3 world, a way in which I actually would still have access to all of my followers from there, and I could like take them and put them onto YouTube or put them onto a newsletter or put them onto TikTok or some other platform and continue on doing what I've been doing. Like that to me was like super like mind-blowing and like really impactful as somebody who didn't know anything about crypto to like be interested enough to learn more. I know we're almost at time. I wanted to talk to you about, oh gosh, people are popping off in the chat. They want you on reality TV for the sake of mass adoption. Yes,
mass adoption.
Rachel, I already said this. I said this, okay, this is Grace's life plan, okay? We already have this nailed down. She's going to figure out, she's already in London. She's already taken step one towards achieving her life aspirations of living in a cute little designer cottage in the countryside of the UK. So we're step one, we're already moving towards that. She's going to achieve that. And then she's going to go on Farmer Wants a Wife and find her husband there. And then they're going to live happily ever after. And in the meantime, during all of this, she's going to be crypto pilling everybody on national, international television. So the plan has been made. Okay. If you want a plan, the plan is there. The plan has been made.
Thank God. Because I can't make my own life plans. That's for sure. I'm so glad I was able to outsource this.
Yes. That's the whole thing with DAOs and crypto, right? Like
so true.
Leave it to the community. That's what Rehash is all about. I'm like, I don't want to decide what guests come on the podcast. So how about you guys decide for me?
Beautiful.
That's what we're all about.
Yep. Work smarter, not harder. That is the motto.
Exactly. Ernest says decentralized cows. You could even decentralize your farming. So you don't have to do the farm work. You can just look cute in your designer stuff and your cute little designer cottage and then decentralize the work.
I love that. I'll just have sign-up slots for like when people want to, take care of this part of the farm. I'm not getting my hands dirty.
Exactly. And in exchange, you'll do, you'll have like a videographer on site to like film them and make really good content for them so that they can
in
become
exchange,
an influencer.
I'll give them clout. Yeah.
Exactly.
Totally.
Yeah. Because you're going to be like world famous by then.
Great. Sign me up.
Okay, I know we're coming up at time. Do you have a hard stop, by the way, or can you go over a little bit?
No, I'm flexible. I think I've got a little more time after this.
Okay, cool. So I did want to just talk to you quickly about like health and wellness a little bit because I know that's something that you care about as well and that I also care about a lot. And I know that you were mentioning something about concierge health diagnostics, which I have to admit I'm not really familiar with that. So can you first of all explain what that term refers to and how it's different from like the traditional healthcare that we think of?
Yes. I will put a big disclaimer and say I'm definitely not an expert in this. I think I have been talking to a friend about this and I think it got stuck in my brain when I put this in there. But it was basically like stemming from a conversation where we had about how we were seeing this new type of like medical tourism popping up where like, for example, in like Korea or in Turkey, people are going there and then getting these like full like multi-day health diagnostic like exams on every part of your body. So like, you know, it's like the dentist, the eye exam, the dermatologist, all your blood work, all your scans, like everything, like addressing every part of your body that they could in one place in like back-to-back appointments and all for like sub $500 US, which to me, I was absolutely mind blown by. The US just could never, like literally, I feel like they could never. I like also, I think kind of like Chinese medicine immigrant mentality, just like very skeptical of going to the doctor. Like the whole process scares me. It's actually, I think like being in the UK has almost cured it a little bit, which is hilarious because like British people love shitting on the NHS. I'm like, I've had great experiences with the NHS. I don't know what you're talking about. Like they send me a text. I sign up for a little appointment on their little portal. I show up. I'm in and out of there in like 15 minutes. I don't pay anything. Wow. No one asks me to pay anything. You know what I mean? Like it actually, that experience is already like very mind blowing to me.
Yeah.
But growing up, it felt like to get a doctor's appointment and like to understand what type of insurance you had. And then based on that insurance, how much your copay was. But then if you reach your maximum, then you're like, you know, your deductible, then you're good. It was like all so confusing. And you could walk out of an appointment and be charged like thousands of dollars for it without really understanding where that money was going to. So I just found that very fascinating, like, because I would very much, I'd be very willing to pay for like a trip to Korea or to Turkey to get all of these things done. And like maybe, you know, and I feel like that could definitely exist in the US as well for like a certain like luxury market or like a even, I don't know, like kind of upper middle class. Like I feel like the willingness to pay is really high there. And it's just, it's like, it's a convenience thing. It's part of the whole longevity movement. I think everyone wants more data on like what their body metrics actually are. Everyone's wearing their whoops and all their like, you know, different sort of measuring devices. It's like that intersection of tech and health and longevity is kind of interesting to see. And I wonder if anything cool will pop up in the US because it just feels like a very untapped market.
Yeah, no, I can relate to that so much. My sister just sent me a video of this girl who went to Turkey for medical tourism and she did all those things, like every part of your body, she got it checked out in one day and it cost her like barely anything. Yeah. I've been primarily working for myself since like 2017, which means I haven't really had healthcare-ish. Health insurance.
You're like, I've been kind of skimping on health insurance.
So this year I was like, okay, I'm going to just pay for really good health insurance like for 1 year and get everything looked at, right? So and then like go back to like my shitty health insurance that I don't, or not having it or whatever. And so I did that this year. And so in January of this year, I was calling to make an appointment with a primary care provider. Yeah. And I kid you not, like the primary healthcare system that I have where I live, the earliest appointment they had available when I called in January was for November.
Oh my God.
I was like, bro, I'm only keeping this health insurance for a year, okay?
For a year.
Whatever I don't get done this year, like it's over for me. So I'm not wasting a whole year of health insurance, like waiting till November. Now, like I go do all my healthcare in Seattle, which is a 4-hour drive away. And I'm like, fuck it. Like, you know, like I might as well just go to Seattle all the time and get my healthcare done while I'm there because that's the closest major city to me. where I can like have easier access to all of this stuff. And like my parents live in Canada. They've been in Canada for like 15 years. And when they first moved there, they were always like complaining about how slow the healthcare is there, like how long it takes to get an appointment and stuff. And I'm like, okay, but like, are you going to call in January and have an appointment in November? Like that slow? Because I am, and I'm still paying a shit ton of money to get that done. So
for the expensive
healthcare. I will gladly take free healthcare and like wait a little bit that I'm gonna have to wait in the US anyway. I'm with you. Like I think tech can maybe solve some of these problems, but I think like at the core in the US, it's like how the US healthcare system is structured that is the problem, and I don't know that tech can really fix that.
Yeah, that's like where I get stuck as well. I'm like, if there is such a large market for this, why hasn't it been done yet? Like surely some really like smart people that work in health tech or med tech or something have like considered this. And I don't know what the barriers are, because we were talking through and we were like, oh, would it be hard to get doctors to come by? And we're like, probably not. Like I think it's like kind of an easy sell for a doctor if they have like really stressful working hours at a hospital or something, and now you're saying, hey, we can pay you like the same amount or like maybe even a little bit less, like who knows, but your like life is so much like your work-life balance is so much better, and the kind of environment that you're in, because like I just feel like being in a hospital is a very stressful thing, and then like the kind of shift environment too, like all of that compounds on each other. So it doesn't feel like it would be the doctors. It's got to be like probably something regulatory. Again, not an area I understand well enough, but in the meantime, I'm like so happy to go to Korea or Turkey to like take care of or like to kind of get this information. Then the other thing on the flip side though that I was thinking was like, how do we know how to trust this data? Even going to see a doctor, they don't always give you the right answers, right? Like they're under a lot of stress. They're seeing a lot of patients. They only have so much time to dedicate to you. So maybe on that front, like the kind of luxury experience would work a little bit better. But it does feel like, who is holding any of these businesses accountable? Because like I can't interpret my blood data. Like I don't know if they've done the right tests or like, you know, got the right machines and stuff like that to like be able to give me that.
No, we just have to trust them. And like not ask any questions, or you know, if you really want to verify, then go get it done multiple times with multiple different doctors and pay you know, even more money to get that done and wait another 10 months to get in with a new provider. But and like for us, it's like I don't like need to go see a doctor. Like I just like wanted to do it this year because I haven't been to a doctor in like 5 years, and I was like, I should probably just do basic stuff. But like for people who actually need healthcare, that is just like crazy to me. Like how long they have to wait to get in, and then how much they have to pay. Like it's so unreasonable to expect people to do that. And like healthcare is a basic human right. Yeah. In my opinion.
One would think.
So like upcharging people at a premium for that is just like, it's literally like inhumane. I think it's like evil.
Yep. I agree. That the whole pharma industry, it's all pretty fucked. And then also it's like, the way that the food industry is also like poisoning us, in particular in the US, because of how things are not very well regulated. Where like people will be like, I'm like allergic to gluten and dairy and all these things in the US, but then actually when I eat like fresh dairy or like, you know, traditionally made gluten products in France or in Italy or in the Mediterranean, my body has no like inflammatory response to it. You're like, geez. Oh geez.
100%. Yeah. No, that's me. I like hardly eat bread here, but whenever I go to Europe, all I do is like eat bread all day because that's what they do. And I'm fine. I'm like shockingly fine. I'm like,
so crazy.
What am I putting in my body in America? Like I'm scared.
It's scary. It is scary.
Maybe after you finish building out Unlonely and Unlonely becomes the next YouTube or replaces YouTube and Twitch altogether, and then you achieve your beautiful, quaint countryside dreams in the UK, this can be the next issue that you work on.
So many side quests.
Take all the learnings that you've taken from the UK healthcare system. I can't believe that's like our North Star. And bring it back to the US.
The bar is on the floor. Like it is really so
It's
low.
like below ground. It's buried. We have to like dig it up first. Yeah. Okay, last question I ask every guest on the podcast is if you have a can you not for us. So this is just something that's a pet peeve of yours, or something that you're like, can people just like not, like, can we just not do this?
Yes.
Do you have one for us today?
Okay, yes, I do have one. Can you not feed into Web3 consumer tribalism. That's my kind of spicy take. I feel like I was hearing this a lot, especially when, like Farcaster was taking off and, there's a very different brand niche across a bunch of the different kind of like social ecosystems. And I am just of the mindset that like, of course, I get that people have different vibes, they have different friends, like they have different like ways that they want to engage with certain types of content. That's totally fine. But I feel like, to your point about like scaling and us being like, we have such a problem with onboarding and with scaling, the market is still so small that like a win for any one of these, I think, is still like a broader win for everyone else. And it like gets us closer to achieving scale and the kind of zero-sum mentality. I just don't think that it really gets us anywhere. I think I always like being like in a more collaborative mindset with people and feeling like, yeah, like there are pros and cons to all of these things. Not everything is perfect. We are most certainly not perfect, but like, let's be competitive maybe in a way that like makes the space better rather than just being like, you suck, I want to tear you down, like you suck, I don't want to have anything to do with you. So yeah, it's very funny.
I totally agree with that. That's Katie says retweet. Maybe let's put that out in tweet form or retweet it. I'll clip it and put it out there so people can retweet the video. Even better. More people, that's such a good reminder that like people just need to hear over and over and over again until it's ingrained in them, because people still seem to not get it. Thank you, Grace, so much for taking the time to come on. Where can people find you if they want to follow you personally? And then also, where can people go to check out Unlonely, whether they want to check out some of the streams there or whether they want to stream on there themselves?
I'm all over. I'm on Twitter at Grace Guan. I'm on Farcaster at Grace. Same with Unlonely _app, unlonely.app for the folks that are already on Unlonely. We love you. The chat has been really fun to kind of read on the side, but I don't know how you do this. Like, I feel like you're doing a really good job of multitasking between like being really present as an interviewer and engaging with me, but then also chiming into the chat. It's been a blast being here. I really looked forward to it. And I'm so glad that we finally got to have a, kind of one-on-one chat, and we'll have to do it in person soon.
Yeah, absolutely. We will. I can't believe this was our first time chatting. I feel like we've been friends for so long, and I'm just like talking to somebody I knew for so long, but I can't wait to meet in person and hang out. Maybe I'll make it to the UK and we can go stalk down these British YouTubers together.
Oh
Watch
my God,
Farmer Wants a Wife and tell me what you think, because that is, we will talk off air about that. I'm really excited about this newfound common interest that we have of trashy dating, reality dating shows. I'm so into it, and we have a lot to talk about, but we'll save that for another time. Thank you so much, Grace. Thank you everybody for joining the chat, and we will be back again next week with another episode. Bye guys. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Rehash. Rehash is hosted and produced by me, Diana Chen. Rehash is also supported by our community of NFT holders who curate our guest lineup each season. To get involved, head over to our website at rehashweb3.xyz and collect this episode as an NFT. Anyone who collects an episode becomes part of the Rehash community and will be able to nominate guests for future seasons. To learn more about how to become a guest on the podcast, go to rehashweb3.xyz/podcast. And to learn more about sponsoring the podcast, go to rehashweb3.xyz/sponsor. Finally, be sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at rehashweb3 or on Warpcast and Lens at Rehash. And join our community on Telegram at t.me/rehashweb3. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. See you next week.